The rushing water of the Snake River swallowed Catherine Adams' scream as her wagon lurched sideways, the current sweeping away everything she owned in a matter of seconds. It was May of 1885, and what had started as a promising journey toward a new life in Twin Falls, Idaho, now threatened to become her watery grave. Catherine clutched desperately at the floating debris of her wagon, her sodden skirts pulling her down into the churning depths. The crossing had looked deceptively shallow, but spring runoff had made the riverbed treacherous. The horse had broken free and made it to shore, but Catherine wasn't so fortunate. Her fingers slipped on the wet wood as the cold water numbed her limbs. "Hold on." A deep voice shouted over the roar of the water. Through the spray, she glimpsed a man on horseback plunging into the river. The powerful chestnut quarter horse fought the current as its rider guided it toward her. The cowboy leaned precariously from his saddle, extending a hand as he approached. "Grab hold," he called, his blue eyes intense beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. Catherine reached out, her strength nearly gone, and felt his calloused hand close around her wrist like an iron vise. With a mighty heave, he pulled her from the water and across his saddle. His arm wrapped securely around her waist as he turned his mount back toward shore. "I've got you," he said, his voice steady despite the danger. "I won't let go." Catherine coughed up river water, trembling violently as the horse battled through the current. The man's arm tightened around her, solid and reassuring as they finally reached the muddy bank. Even when they reached solid ground, his grip remained firm, as though afraid she might slip away. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, then lifted Catherine down with gentle hands that belied their strength. Her legs buckled beneath her, and he caught her against his chest. "Steady there," he murmured, supporting her weight effortlessly. Catherine looked up through dripping strands of copper hair to see a weathered face, perhaps 30 years old, with kind eyes and a strong jawline shadowed by stubble. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. "You saved my life." "Lucas Alvarez," he said, finally releasing her once he was sure she could stand. "And you are Catherine Adams," she replied, wringing water from her skirts. "I've lost everything. My wagon, my supplies." Her voice broke as the magnitude of her situation hit her. Lucas surveyed the river where parts of her wagon were still visible, being carried downstream. "Not everything," he said quietly. "You're still breathing." Catherine nodded, fighting back tears. She'd come west after her husband's death, determined to claim the land left to her by an uncle near Twin Falls. Now she stood on the riverbank with nothing but the clothes on her back. Lucas removed his duster and placed it around her shoulders. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. You can dry off, get warm, and we'll figure out what to do next." "I couldn't impose, Miss Adams. There's not another settlement for 30 miles and nights coming. I'd say you don't have much choice." His tone was matter of fact, but his eyes held something more concern, certainly, but also something that made Catherine's heart flutter despite her dire circumstances. "Very well," she conceded. Lucas helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. With one arm still secure around her waist, he clicked to his horse and they set off. Catherine was acutely aware of his solid presence at her back, the warmth of him seeping through her wet clothes. For the first time since her husband's passing 2 years ago, she felt safe. The landscape rolled by as they rode, the rugged beauty of southern Idaho stretching in all directions. The setting sun painted the sagebrush golden, and in the distance, mountains rose purple against the sky. Under different circumstances, Catherine would have been enchanted. "What brings a woman alone to cross the Snake River?" Lucas asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Catherine explained about her uncle's land grant. "After Thomas, my husband, died of influenza, there was nothing left for me in Ohio. I sold what I could and decided to start fresh. That takes courage, Lucas observed. Or foolishness, Catherine replied with a bitter laugh. Look where it's gotten me. Alive, heading for shelter with a chance to begin again, Lucas said firmly. I'd say that's not so bad. His words warmed something in Catherine that had been cold for a very long time. Before she could respond, a modest ranch house came into view, nestled among cottonwood trees. A barn stood nearby, and fenced pastures spread out from the buildings. It wasn't grand, but it spoke of hard work and care. Welcome to Alvarez Ranch, Lucas said, dismounting and reaching up to help her down. Catherine's legs were still unsteady, and she leaned against him longer than was strictly necessary. It's lovely, she said sincerely. Lucas led her inside the simple but clean house. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall and practical furniture filled the main room. My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, comes by days, but she's gone home now, he explained, building up the fire. I'll find you some dry clothes and fix something to eat. The clothes he brought belonged to his sister, who occasionally visited from Denver. They were a bit large on Catherine's frame, but blessedly dry. While Lucas prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, Catherine sat by the fire, combing through her tangled hair with her fingers. Over dinner, she learned that Lucas had come west after the war between the states, working cattle drives until he could afford his own spread. He'd built the ranch from nothing over 10 years, and now ran a modest but profitable operation with the help of 2 hired hands who lived in the bunkhouse. And your family? Catherine asked, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. A shadow crossed Lucas's face. Lost my parents young. My sister's all I have left, and she's married with children in Denver. I'm sorry, Catherine said softly. Lucas shrugged. Life out here teaches you that loss is part of living. You pick up and move forward. Yes, Catherine whispered, thinking of her own losses. That it does. Later, Lucas showed her to a spare room. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we'll see about salvaging what we can from the river. Catherine caught his hand as he turned to leave. Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. His gaze held hers for a long moment. Lucas, please. And there's no debt between us, Catherine. The way he said her name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with her earlier dunking in the river. After he left, Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She'd nearly died. She'd lost all her worldly possessions. And she'd been rescued by possibly the most intriguing man she'd met in her 28 years. Sleep claimed her quickly that night, and she dreamed of strong arms and river currents, of drowning and being saved. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through simple curtains. Catherine dressed in yesterday's clothes, now dry but badly wrinkled. When she emerged from her room, she found Lucas already up, frying bacon and eggs. Morning, he greeted her with a small smile. Thought we'd need a good breakfast before heading back to the river. They ate companionably, and Catherine found herself studying Lucas when he wasn't looking. There was something compelling about his quiet strength and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, which wasn't often, but when it happened, it transformed his serious face. After breakfast, they rode double on his horse back to the crossing. The river had calmed somewhat overnight, and scattered along the banks were pieces of Catherine's wagon and possessions. Lucas tied his horse to a tree and rolled up his sleeves. Let's see what we can find. They worked side by side for hours, retrieving what they could. Catherine nearly wept when Lucas uncovered her carpet bag containing her mother's Bible and a few family keepsakes. Some of her clothing was salvageable, along with cooking utensils and tools. But her wagon was destroyed beyond repair, and most of her supplies were either ruined or lost. It's not much to start a new life with, she said, surveying their small pile of recovered items. Lucas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's more than some have." As they worked, Catherine discovered that Lucas was a man of few words but thoughtful actions. He anticipated her needs, offering water when she was thirsty, suggesting breaks when she looked tired. There was something immensely comforting about his presence. By mid-afternoon, they had salvaged everything possible. Lucas lashed the items to his horse and they began the ride back to the ranch. "What will you do now?" he asked as they crested a hill overlooking the valley. Catherine sighed. "I still have the deed to my uncle's land. I have some money sewn into my petticoat. I'll find a way." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "The land your uncle left, where exactly is it?" Catherine described the location as best she could from the deed's description. Lucas stiffened behind her. "That's the old Blackwater parcel. It borders my northern pasture." "Then we're neighbors," Catherine said, surprised by the coincidence. "That land's been abandoned for years," Lucas told her. "Your uncle never worked it himself." "No, he was a land speculator. He bought parcels throughout the West but never settled on them. When he died, he left this one to me." "It's rough country," Lucas warned. "No structures, just open land. Good for grazing, but you'd need to build from scratch." Catherine's heart sank. Without her wagon and supplies, the task seemed insurmountable. As if reading her thoughts, Lucas spoke again. "You could stay at the ranch while you figure things out. There's plenty of room." "I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition," he interrupted. "You'd be helping me out, actually. Mrs. Winters is getting on in years and could use an extra pair of hands, and—" he hesitated. "It gets lonesome out here." Catherine considered his offer. Staying with a man she barely knew went against everything she'd been taught was proper. But this was the frontier, and conventional rules often gave way to practical necessities. Besides, something told her Lucas Alvarez was a man of honor. "Thank you," she said finally. "I accept, at least until I can make other arrangements." That evening, after another simple but satisfying meal, they sat by the fire. Lucas whittled a piece of wood while Catherine mended her dress, damaged in the river. "Tell me about Ohio," Lucas said, breaking the comfortable silence. Catherine described her childhood on her father's farm, her brief marriage to the local doctor's son, and the epidemic that had taken both Thomas and her father within weeks of each other. "I thought my heart would break," she admitted, "but somehow it kept beating." Lucas nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Hearts are stubborn that way." "What about you?" Catherine asked. "You mentioned the war." Lucas's hand stilled on his whittling. "I was young. Too young, really, but I lied about my age, saw things no boy should see." His jaw tightened. "When it was over, I couldn't go home. Everything looked different to me." "So you came west." "Followed the sun," he agreed with a slight smile. "Worked cattle drives from Texas up to Montana. Saved every penny. When I found this valley, something told me to stay." "It's beautiful land," Catherine observed. "It is," Lucas agreed, his voice softening. "Harsh sometimes, but honest. You always know where you stand with the land." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams. Catherine found herself laughing for the first time in years, and Lucas's rare smiles became more frequent. When she finally retired to the spare room, Catherine realized that the crushing weight of loss she'd carried since Thomas's death felt lighter somehow. Lucas understood grief in a way few people did, not as something to be fixed or forgotten, but as part of the landscape of life. The next day, Mrs. Winters arrived, a plump, no-nonsense woman in her 60s who took Catherine's presence in stride. "About time this place had a woman's touch," she declared, eyeing Catherine approvingly. "And Lucas could use the company. Man talks to his horse more than people." Catherine couldn't help laughing at Lucas's embarrassed expression. Over the following days, she fell into a routine at the ranch. She helped Mrs. Winters with household tasks, learned about ranch operations from Lucas, and began to feel useful again. In the evenings, she and Lucas would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. One evening, about a week after her arrival, Lucas cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'm riding out to your land tomorrow. Thought you might want to come along, see it for yourself." Catherine's heart leapt. "I'd like that very much." The next morning dawned clear and warm. They set out early, Lucas on his chestnut gelding and Catherine riding a gentle mare from his small remuda. The land rolled beneath them, sagebrush giving way to patches of grass and wildflowers. Lucas pointed out landmarks and shared the names of plants unfamiliar to Catherine. After about 2 hours' ride, they reached a rise overlooking a small valley. A creek wound through it, bordered by cottonwoods. The grass was thicker here, dotted with spring flowers. "This is it," Lucas said. "Your land starts at that creek and runs north for about a mile, then east for 2." Catherine drank in the sight. It was wild and untouched, beautiful in its rawness. "It's more than I imagined," she breathed. They dismounted and walked along the creek. Lucas showed her where a cabin might best be built, sheltered from the wind but close to water. He pointed out good grazing areas and warned about a section prone to flooding in spring. "You know this land well," Catherine observed. Lucas looked almost sheepish. "I ride through here sometimes. Always thought it was a shame no one worked it." They stopped to rest in the shade of the cottonwoods, sharing a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by birdsong and the gentle gurgle of the creek. "I can see why you love it out here," Catherine said finally. "There's a peace to it." Lucas nodded, his eyes on the distant mountains. "Most people only see the hardship, they miss the beauty." "Like life itself," Catherine mused, "the greatest joys often come after the deepest sorrows." Lucas turned to look at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You're not what I expected, Catherine Adams." "What did you expect, when I pulled you from that river?" He shook his head. "Not someone who'd see the heart of things so clearly." Catherine felt herself blush under his gaze. "I think near-death experiences have a way of clarifying one's perspective." Lucas smiled, one of his rare, full smiles that transformed his face. "That they do." As they packed up to leave, Catherine took a last look at her land. "I'll build here," she decided. "Somehow." The ride back to the ranch was quieter, each lost in thought. Catherine couldn't stop thinking about the land, imagining a small cabin, perhaps a garden. But the reality of her situation remained daunting. She had some money, but not enough to build properly and still have reserves for winter. And a woman alone would face considerable challenges. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching stars appear, Catherine broached the subject. "I need to find work in town, save more money before I can build on my land." Lucas frowned. "Twin Falls doesn't offer much for a lady like yourself." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Catherine replied. "I could teach, perhaps, or work in a store." Lucas was silent for a long moment. "There's another possibility," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "A partnership." Catherine looked at him questioningly. "Your land adjoins mine," he explained. "Together, we'd have one of the largest spreads in the county. I have the manpower and equipment to develop your parcel, and you have good water rights with that creek." "Are you proposing a business arrangement?" Catherine asked, trying to understand. Lucas shifted in his chair, uncharacteristically nervous. "In part, but—" He took a deep breath. "I know it's sudden, and you hardly know me. But I've never met anyone like you, Catherine. Your strength, your grace in the face of hardship." Catherine's heart began to race as she realized what he was suggesting. "I'm not a man of flowery words," Lucas continued, "but I believe we could build something good together, not just on the land but between us." He finally met her eyes. I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife." Catherine sat very still, stunned by his proposal. It was sudden they'd known each other barely 2 weeks. Yet in those 2 weeks, she'd come to respect Lucas deeply. She'd seen his integrity, his quiet strength, his kindness. And yes, there was an attraction she couldn't deny, a warmth that kindled whenever they were near. "I know it's not a romantic notion," Lucas said into her silence, "and I'll understand if you say no." "It's not that," Catherine said softly. "I'm just surprised." She looked out at the darkening land. "When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over." "I felt the same after Isabel," Lucas admitted. Catherine turned to him, startled. "Isabel, my wife," he explained. "She died in childbirth our first year here. The baby, too." His voice held old pain. "I never spoke of her because, well, out here men don't talk about such things." "I'm so sorry," Catherine whispered, understanding now his solitary existence, the shadows that sometimes crossed his face. "It was 8 years ago," Lucas said. "I'd made my peace with being alone, until I pulled a stubborn woman from the Snake River." There was tenderness in his voice that made Catherine's breath catch. "I don't expect you to love me," he continued, "but I think we could build a good life, a partnership based on respect, and perhaps in time." Catherine reached out impulsively and laid her hand over his. "Yes," Lucas blinked. "Yes, I'll marry you," Catherine said, surprising herself with her certainty. "We'll build something together." Lucas stared at her for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. He turned his hand to clasp hers. "You're sure?" "It's not just gratitude it's not gratitude," Catherine assured him. "It's faith. In you. In what we might become together." 2 days later they rode into Twin Falls, a growing but still small settlement that served the surrounding ranches and farms. They visited the preacher to arrange the wedding, then went to the general store where Lucas insisted on buying Catherine fabric for a new dress. "Mrs. Winters can help with the sewing," he said. "Every bride should have something special." As Catherine fingered a bolt of blue calico that matched Lucas's eyes, the shop owner's wife approached. "You must be the woman Lucas pulled from the river," she said. "Word travels fast around here." "Catherine Adams," she introduced herself, somewhat taken aback. "Mary Wilson," the woman replied with a warm smile. "My husband owns the store. We've known Lucas for years. He's a good man." She lowered her voice. "We were all beginning to think he'd never marry after losing Isabel." "I heard about his loss," Catherine said carefully. Mary nodded. "Nearly destroyed him. He worked himself half to death those first years, barely speaking to anyone." She patted Catherine's hand. "It's good to see light in his eyes again." As they rode back to the ranch, Catherine pondered Mary's words. She'd seen the respect Lucas commanded in town, noticed how even the roughest men nodded to him with deference. He was a man who had earned his place through hard work and integrity. "Penny for your thoughts?" Lucas asked, riding beside her. Catherine smiled. "I was thinking how strange life is. 2 weeks ago I was drowning in the Snake River. Now I'm planning a wedding." Lucas's expression grew serious. "You can still change your mind. I won't hold you to it." "You want me to change my mind?" Catherine asked, suddenly uncertain. "No," Lucas said firmly, "but I want you to be sure." They stopped their horses on a rise overlooking the valley. The afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, and in the distance, Catherine could see the cottonwoods marking her land. "I am sure," she said. "When Thomas died, I thought I'd never feel again joy, hope, anything. Coming west was my attempt to outrun the emptiness." She looked at Lucas. "I didn't expect to find someone who understood that emptiness, who had lived with it too." Lucas reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "We'll build something new, Catherine, together." The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks later. The small church in Twin Falls was filled with ranchers, townspeople, and the few friends Catherine had made since her arrival. She wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Winters had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Lucas waited at the altar, uncharacteristically clean-shaven and dressed in a new suit that made him look younger and somewhat uncomfortable. But when Catherine walked down the aisle, the look in his eyes wonder, tenderness, and something deeper made her heart skip. The ceremony was brief, frontier practical. They exchanged plain gold bands and simple vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas hesitated only a moment before bending to give Catherine a gentle, questioning kiss that deepened when she responded. The wedding celebration moved to the town hall, where tables groaned with food brought by neighbors. There was music and dancing, and Catherine found herself whirling from partner to partner as everyone wanted to dance with the new Mrs. Alvarez. "You've caused quite a stir," Lucas murmured when he finally claimed her for a dance. "Half the men here are wondering how a gruff old cowboy like me managed to win such a beautiful bride." "You're not old," Catherine laughed, "and you won me by being exactly who you are." As evening fell, they said their goodbyes and rode back to the ranch, their home now, together. Catherine felt a flutter of nerves as they approached. She and Lucas had been living under the same roof for weeks, but now everything was different. Lucas seemed to sense her anxiety. After stabling the horses, he walked with her to the house and paused at the door. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I meant what I said about building slowly. There's no rush for anything." Catherine looked up at this man who had become her husband, whose strength and gentleness had already begun to heal parts of her she thought would always remain broken. "I'm not afraid," she said truthfully. It's been a long time." Lucas took her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "For me too," he whispered, and kissed her with a tenderness that quickly kindled into something more urgent. That night, they discovered each other slowly, with wonder and care. Lucas's hands, so capable with horses and ranch work, proved equally gentle with Catherine's body. And Catherine, who had feared that part of her had died with Thomas, found herself awakening to feelings more intense than she'd known possible. Afterward, lying in Lucas's arms, Catherine felt a profound sense of rightness, of having found her place in the world. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. Lucas's arms tightened around her. "For what? For pulling me from the river, for not letting go." She felt rather than saw his smile in the darkness. "Best thing I ever did," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm of shared work and discovery. Catherine learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping with cooking and household tasks, but also riding out with Lucas to check cattle and mend fences. Lucas, in turn, began building furniture for their home, crafting a new dining table and chairs with his own hands. They also started working Catherine's land, making plans for a small cabin there. "Not to live in," Lucas explained as they marked out the dimensions, "but as a line shack for when we're working this section. Maybe someday, when the ranch is bigger, we can build something more substantial." Catherine nodded, understanding his practical approach. But as she watched Lucas drive stakes into the ground, she found herself imagining children playing beside the creek, a family growing in this beautiful, wild place. Summer turned to fall, and the rhythm of the ranch changed with the season. There were cattle to move to lower pastures before winter, hay to cut and store, endless preparations for the coming cold. One evening in late September, as they sat by the fire after a long day's work, Catherine set aside her mending and took a deep breath. "Lucas," she said carefully, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from his ledger, concern crossing his face at her serious tone. "What is it?" Catherine took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a child." Lucas froze, his expression unreadable. For a terrible moment, Catherine feared he was upset. Perhaps he didn't want children after losing his first baby with Isabel. Then his face transformed with a joy so radiant it took her breath away. "A baby," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're sure?" Catherine nodded, tears filling her eyes at his reaction. "I'm sure." Lucas gathered her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of glass. "Catherine," he breathed against her hair, "I never thought, after Isabel." He pulled back to look at her, and she was startled to see tears in his eyes. "I'm afraid," he admitted, "but I'm so happy." Catherine understood his fear all too well. Childbirth was dangerous, especially on the frontier. "We'll be careful," she promised, "and Twin Falls has a proper doctor now." Lucas nodded, placing his hand gently on her stomach again. "A family," he said wonderingly. "Our family." That night he held her with particular tenderness, his hand never straying far from the place where their child grew. The news of Catherine's pregnancy spread quickly through the small community. Mrs. Winters fussed over her, insisting she rest more and bringing tonics and special foods. The women from neighboring ranches visited with gifts of baby clothes and practical advice. As winter settled over the valley, Lucas became increasingly protective. He insisted on doing more of the heavy work, fretting when Catherine wanted to help with the animals or join him for rides to check the property. "I'm pregnant, not made of china," she told him one evening when he objected to her chopping vegetables for stew. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, most while working far harder than I am." "I know," Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you. Either of you." Catherine softened, understanding the fear that drove his overprotectiveness. She set down her knife and went to him, taking his face in her hands. "Look at me, Lucas. I'm healthy. The baby is healthy, doctor." Morgan said everything is progressing normally. Lucas pulled her close, his hand finding its familiar place on her growing belly. "I never knew I could love like this," he confessed. "It terrifies me." "Love always does," Catherine replied, holding him tightly. As her pregnancy progressed, Catherine found herself thinking often of the wagon accident that had brought her to Lucas. If not for the river, if not for his timely arrival, none of this would exist: their marriage, their growing child, the life they were building together. "You believe in fate?" she asked Lucas one snowy evening as they lay in bed, his hand tracing patterns on her swollen belly where their baby kicked. "I never used to," he admitted. "Seemed like life was just one hard thing after another, no rhyme or reason to it." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Now I'm not so sure." "What are the odds I'd be at that river crossing just when you needed me?" "Exactly," Catherine said softly. "Of all the places in the West, my uncle left me land adjoining yours. Of all the times my wagon could have overturned, it happened when you were near." She turned to face him. "It's as if we were always meant to find each other." Lucas's eyes, so often guarded, were completely open to her now, filled with a love that still took her breath away. "Then I'm grateful for whatever force brought us together," he said, kissing her with gentle passion. Winter deepened, bringing heavy snow that blanketed the valley. The ranch became a cozy island in a sea of white, with Lucas keeping paths cleared between the house, barn, and other outbuildings. Catherine's pregnancy advanced, her body growing rounder as the baby developed. By February, she had to admit to needing more rest, her energy depleted by the life growing within her. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, Catherine sat by the fire, sewing a tiny gown for the baby. Lucas entered with an armful of wood for the fire, stomping snow from his boots. "Storm's getting worse," he reported, building up the fire. "Check the animals, they're all secure." Catherine winced suddenly, her hand going to her side. Lucas was at her side instantly. "What is it, the baby?" "Just kicking," Catherine assured him with a smile. "Very active tonight." Lucas knelt beside her chair, placing his hand on her belly. The baby obliged with a forceful kick that made him laugh in wonder. "Strong," he observed. "Like his mother." "Or her father," Catherine countered with a smile. Lucas looked up at her, his expression suddenly serious. "I've been thinking about names." "Have you?" Catherine was surprised. Lucas rarely spoke of such things unprompted. He nodded. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after your father. You've spoken of him with such love." Tears sprang to Catherine's eyes. "Daniel." "Daniel Alvarez," Lucas confirmed. "It has a good sound." "And if it's a girl?" Catherine asked, deeply touched by his gesture. Lucas hesitated. "I thought perhaps Elizabeth, after my mother." "Daniel or Elizabeth," Catherine said, testing the names. "Both are perfect." She covered his hand with hers where it rested on her belly. "Thank you." The blizzard continued through the night and into the next day. Catherine woke before dawn with a strange discomfort in her lower back. She shifted in bed, trying not to wake Lucas, but the ache persisted. As gray light filtered through the window, she realized the pain was coming in waves. "Lucas," she said, touching his shoulder. "I think the baby is coming." He was instantly alert. "Now, but it's too early," Dr. Morgan said. "March." "Babies come when they're ready," Catherine said, trying to keep her voice calm despite her own anxiety. "And this one seems ready now." Lucas leapt from bed, pulling on clothes. "I'll go for the doctor." Catherine caught his arm. "The blizzard, Lucas. You can't go out in this." He looked toward the window where snow was still falling heavily. The ride to Twin Falls would be treacherous, perhaps impossible, but the alternative— "I've helped birth calves and foals," he said, his voice strained. "But a baby, Mrs. Winters has attended births," Catherine reminded him. "She's only a mile away. You could reach her." Lucas nodded, his expression set with determination. "I'll get her. You stay in bed." He kissed her quickly. "Everything will be fine." After he left, Catherine tried to remain calm. The contractions were still far apart, which she knew was good. First babies often took their time, but fear crept in despite her efforts. She thought of Isabel dying in childbirth in this very house and shuddered. "No," she said aloud, rubbing her belly. "We're going to be fine, little one. Your father won't lose us." The hours crawled by. Catherine paced the bedroom between contractions, trying to ease the pressure in her back. When she heard the front door open, relief washed over her. Lucas appeared in the doorway, snow melting in his hair and beard, with Mrs. Winters behind him. The older woman took charge immediately, sending Lucas for hot water and clean linens while she examined Catherine. "Everything looks right as rain," Mrs. Winters declared. "Baby's in the proper position. We've just got to be patient now." The labor progressed slowly but steadily. Lucas stayed by Catherine's side, holding her hand through contractions, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. As the day wore on and the pain intensified, Catherine drew strength from his unwavering presence. "You're doing beautifully," he told her as Mrs. Winters announced it was nearly time to push. "I'm so proud of you." Catherine gripped his hand, fear and determination mingling in her eyes. "Don't let go," she whispered. "Never," Lucas promised fiercely. When the final stage came, Catherine found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. With Lucas supporting her and Mrs. Winters coaching, she brought their child into the world with a final, tremendous push. A lusty cry filled the room. "A boy," Mrs. Winters announced triumphantly. "A fine, strong boy." Lucas made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob as Mrs. Winters cleaned the baby and placed him on Catherine's chest. Catherine looked down at their son, with his shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features, and felt her heart expand impossibly. "Daniel," she whispered, touching his cheek. Lucas sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Catherine, gazing at his son with wonder. "Daniel," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "He's perfect." He pressed a kiss to Catherine's temple. "You're perfect, Mrs." Winters busied herself with the afterbirth and cleaning up, giving the new family a moment of privacy. Outside, the blizzard had finally stopped, and weak winter sunshine filtered through the window. "Thank you," Lucas said, his forehead resting against Catherine's. "For my son, for our family." Catherine looked up at this man who had pulled her from the river and into a life more beautiful than she could have imagined. "For a man who claims not to be good with words," she said with a tired smile, "you say exactly the right things." In the days that followed, they settled into life with their newborn. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, holding Daniel whenever he wasn't working, singing old Spanish lullabies his mother had sung to him. Catherine recovered quickly, her body strong and resilient. When Daniel was 2 weeks old, Lucas disappeared into his workshop for several hours. He returned looking pleased but mysterious. "I have something to show you," he told Catherine. "Can you bundle up Daniel and come to the barn?" Curious, Catherine wrapped their son warmly and followed Lucas. In the barn, he led her to his workshop at the back, where a beautiful wooden cradle stood on the floor, its surface polished to a warm glow. "Lucas," Catherine breathed, running her hand over the smooth wood. "It's exquisite." "I've been working on it in secret since you told me about the baby," he admitted. "Wanted it to be a surprise." Catherine noticed something carved into the headboard, 2 intertwined letters, C and L. "It's perfect," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "Daniel will love it." "I hope he's the first of many to use it," Lucas said, drawing her close with their son between them. Spring came to the valley in a rush of green and wildflowers. As the land awakened from winter's sleep, so did the ranch, with new calves in the pastures and seedlings in Catherine's kitchen garden. Daniel grew rapidly, alert and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. On a warm May afternoon, almost exactly a year after Catherine's wagon had overturned in the Snake River, Lucas saddled their horses. "I want to show you something," he told Catherine, helping her mount while Mrs. Winters watched Daniel. They rode to Catherine's land, their land now, joined through marriage. When they reached the creek where they had once picnicked, Catherine gasped. A small cabin stood among the cottonwoods, its walls of fresh-cut pine gleaming in the sunlight. "Lucas," she breathed, dismounting to approach the structure. "When did you do this?" "Been working on it whenever I could get away," he explained, watching her reaction with pleasure. "The men helped some. Wanted to have it finished by today. Today." "1 year since I pulled a stubborn woman from the river," he reminded her with a smile. Seemed fitting. Catherine walked around the cabin, taking in its sturdy construction and thoughtful details. A small porch faced the creek, and windows were placed to catch both morning and evening light. Inside was simple but charming. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a wooden table and chairs nearby. A bed frame stood in one corner and shelves lined another wall. It was basic but sound, built with care and consideration. "It's not just a line shack," Catherine realized. "You built a home," Lucas nodded. "I thought, when Daniel gets older, maybe we'd want to spend time here in summer, or if we have more children, the ranch house might feel crowded." He looked suddenly uncertain. "If you don't like it," Catherine silenced him with a kiss. "I love it," she said when they parted. "I love that you built this for our future." They stood in the doorway, looking out at the land that had brought them together through such strange circumstances. The creek burbled peacefully, wildflowers dotted the grass, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the lush spring growth. "I never imagined this," Catherine said softly. When I decided to come west, I thought I was seeking a place, some land to call my own. I never dreamed I'd find a home. A family. Lucas wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. When I rode to the river that day, I was just going about my business, checking fences. He turned her to face him. Instead, I found everything I never knew I was missing. Catherine reached up to touch his face, still weathered but less guarded now, softened by love and fatherhood. "Promise me something." "Anything," he said without hesitation. "Promise you'll never let go." Lucas pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. "Never," he vowed. "Not for all my days." And he never did. 10 years later, the Alvarez ranch had prospered beyond their early hopes. The small herd had grown substantial, and their holdings expanded to include not just Catherine's original parcel but additional land purchased as neighboring ranchers retired or moved on. The cabin by the creek had been enlarged, becoming a favorite summer retreat for the family. The family itself had grown too. Daniel, now a sturdy 10-year-old with his father's quiet strength and his mother's inquisitive mind, had been joined by 7-year-old Elizabeth and 3-year-old Michael. The ranch house had been expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Lucas adding rooms with the same care he put into everything he built. On the anniversary of their meeting, Lucas and Catherine still rode to the river crossing where her wagon had overturned. It had become a tradition, this pilgrimage to the place where their story began. "Still glad I pulled you out?" Lucas would ask with the slight smile that was now familiar to all who knew him, and Catherine would always answer the same way. "Still glad you never let go." Their love had deepened over the years, weathering the challenges of ranch life, childbirth, drought seasons, and all the trials that came with carving out a life in the still wild West. But through it all, they held fast to each other, their bond forged in the rushing waters of the Snake River and tempered by shared joys and sorrows. In a land where many faltered, they built something enduring, not just a prosperous ranch, but a true partnership. And it all began with a wagon that tipped in a river crossing, and a cowboy who pulled a woman out and wouldn't let go.